once again, I've got a Star Trek ship to show you. Another little Eaglemoss model. Much bigger than the other ones I've got. They did do a bunch of XL versions, but I don't know if they ever did this one in a different size. It doesn't matter, because I love it. Now, Enterprise is not my favourite series. It has its merits, but, you know, it's the kind of show that only a Star Trek fan could get any enjoyment out of, because it's fucking rubbish for the most part. But it did have a lot of neat ideas, and one of those neat ideas never actually made it to screen, which is what this model represents. Now, Star Trek loves refitted versions of its ships. This was sorry about that squeaking. This was a trend kicked off with the motion picture, where they had like a new movie version of the Enterprise. It was meant to be the original ship, but with a vast upgrade that was meant to have taken like an entire year. And the end result was a ship that didn't look much like the original TOS design, and I always felt it was a little bit incongruous trying to imagine how that TV series ship became the movie ship, because it just never seemed like it was really possible. Like, you're basically building a new ship. The proportions were all so different, but it doesn't matter because none of this is real. Anyway, this is, I think, one of my favourite ships ever, really. Which is interesting because I don't really rate the ship that it's refitted from very much. I feel like the NX-01 Enterprise, I'll throw a picture of it up here because I don't have a model of it. I feel like the NX-01 Enterprise, the original design, it's meant to represent the Starfleet ship design that that this sort of ship came from, right? So I'll get Kirk's original Enterprise up here. Now, Kirk's original Enterprise sets the template for all Star Trek ships going forwards, certainly Federation ones anyway. It's got the secondary hull, it's got this massive deflector dish, it's got these huge pylons with these warp nacelles. The warp nacelles are, you know, bigger and longer than the saucer that people actually live and work in, you know. It's meant to be a really powerful ship with these enormous engines driving the whole thing. It's mostly engine if you look at the original ship, right? The secondary hull is there to generate power for these things. It's supposed to be a powerhouse of the time. It's like it's a destroyer. It's a massive feat of engineering. And it's designed to generate enormous amounts of power so it can move quickly to other star systems and represent the Federation's interest as the flagship. These engines are deliberately quite enormous compared to the rest of the ship. So, classic design, iconic. Anyway, so then they bring out Enterprise fucking decades later, and it is meant to be a ship that comes before this one. And the design is meant to reflect a sort of earlier prototypical version of the design that Starfleet would eventually come to settle on, or the design. It's meant to be the start of a grand design lineage that ends up as this and goes on to become the Enterprise D and all the later Berman era ships, right? The problem is that it makes so many daft concessions that it becomes very obviously a throwback rather than anything that could be a progenitor, right? I don't know if I've worded that properly, but you'll see what I mean here. So the deflector dish is meant to be this round dish that when the ship is traveling at immense speeds, it's meant to deflect particles, like it produces a deflector field, which is basically the ship's navigational shields, which is meant to like deflect like cosmic particles and stuff like that, which, if the ship slammed into a tiny particle at high speeds, at high warp, then even the smallest particle could do a lot of damage to the ship. So the idea is that the deflector dish creates like a forward-facing kind of shield around the ship, so that none of those particles can break through when it's traveling at warp or high impulse or whatever. Like, it's fucking television. That's the principle. I don't know if it's got any fucking scientific basis whatsoever, but that's the idea, right? So, but the thing to remember is Star Trek ships, big dish, right? Now, the NX-01, and it's the same on the refit as it is on the original ship, if you see here, has this incredibly stupid flat deflector dish that looks like it's been squashed in fucking Cinema 4D. It doesn't make sense as something that would eventually become a round dish, because you very obviously start with a round dish and squeeze it to get something that fits in the very kind of narrow design of the original NX-01. So ignore the secondary hull for a minute. The original NX-01 Enterprise is just a saucer section, these two struts here, pylons and warp engines, right? The warp nacelles. And the warp nacelles are very small on the NX-01 compared to the saucer section and the living space. So it's very much kind of a flipped idea. And but I think they were trying to do something different, and the idea was that, like, this is Starfleet's first major exploration vessel. They don't really know what they're doing. They haven't really got it right. And the ship was very underpowered and was basically useless against any hostile foes. And that was a big sort of part of the narrative of the earlier seasons of Enterprise. It was like, oh, by the way, the ship's really crap. Anyway, so the idea is that Enterprise, had it not been cancelled in the end of season 4, would have gone on to depict the Romulan War, the Earth-Romulan War, which is an event that really overshadows a lot of what happens in the later Star Treks, like the Berman era, all the Romulan Vulcan reunification stuff. It's meant to be this like incredibly formative event that happens to the early Federation that convinces them that the galaxy is a dangerous place, and they can't just be explorers. And anyway, so the idea is that the original NX-01 ship, which does not have this secondary hull, gets refitted with a secondary hull. The idea is that the secondary hull, within the secondary hull, they can have a much bigger warp core, so they can generate more power for faster travel and more powerful shields and weapons. And these are supposed to be the ships that essentially fight the Romulan War, which is meant to be quite a devastating conflict. It's never been depicted. It's one of these things that Star Trek always kind of, it's like a black hole in the timeline. They allude to it a lot, but they never quite go there. And I think it's probably best that they don't. I think it works as a sort of as a bit of a whispered campfire tale, the Romulan War. Anyway, I might be talking shite, but it has this deflector dish, which makes this thing like kind of like a secondary deflector dish, which is interesting because if you look at the Voyager, which, oh, it's a bit dusty, but which, as you probably know, was designed much earlier, in the real world, was designed much earlier than this ship was. Voyager has a secondary deflector. Now, the secondary deflector, I guess it's meant to support the main deflector dish. I don't know. Maybe the two things are meant to work in tandem. It's a new kind of design. Who knows? But I just think it's just an interesting design feature that sort of the Enterprise NX-01 refit kind of comes around to this idea of having two deflector dishes. Anyway, I don't know why that's interesting to me, but I mean, the Voyager's a beautiful ship as well, isn't it? I always loved the Voyager. I always loved the Voyager. I always loved how, like, when it's front on, it looks like a Navy ship. Like, it looks military, you know? Anyway. I fucking love these Eaglemoss models. Anyway. So, like, I'm talking a lot of shite now, but this ship, as I say, never made it to screen. It was designed to fight a war that the Enterprise show never got to depict. And I'm kind of glad it never got to depict the Romulan War, because it's meant to be this kind of horrific, devastating conflict. And Enterprise, let's be diplomatic, was not the best series. And I don't think the framework of Enterprise and that dynamic and those characters, I don't think it would have given the Romulan War the best chance of being depicted to a particularly high standard. I'm waffling a lot there, but I don't know. Another problem with the NX-01, of course, is that it has this profile that's remarkably similar to the Akira class ship from the Next Generation films and from later seasons of Deep Space Nine. And it's very, very clearly a modified Akira class ship. It's like they looked at the Akira class and wanted it for the hero ship of the next show, which was set much earlier in the timeline, and therefore, it was altered to be some sort of like pre-Kirk hybrid design, and it just doesn't work. This is what I'm getting at, right? It doesn't fucking work as something that's meant to be an earlier version of this. But I love the NX-01 refit. I think it's quite a beautiful ship. I love that it's an intermediate step between the NX-01 and the Constitution class. I love that it tries to sort of build a kind of a design lineage between the two things. And I also love, and I haven't got a model of this one, so I'll just have to throw up a picture, but I also love that the Constitution class from Strange New Worlds, the new version of the Enterprise, clearly takes a lot of design cues from the NX class. So you can see a very clear design lineage now between the original NX-01, the NX-01 refit, Pike's Enterprise, and Kirk's Enterprise from the motion picture. As far as I think, essentially, Strange New Worlds and Discovery represent a visual reboot, so this isn't really what the Enterprise looked like anymore. That's how I reconcile it in my head anyway. It doesn't really matter. I don't think visual consistency matters too much as long as, the stories being told are good and the production is using the resources of the time in the best possible way. So I think marshalling all the power of modern television production to one by one replicate what a 60s television show looked like would be a fucking waste of everyone's time. So basically, and I'm not sure I made it clear, I love the NX-01 refit despite not really being that thrilled with the original NX-01 design. I love that it represents this Federation in panic. Federation now having to retrofit its exploration ships to make them kind of suitable for fighting a war against an enemy that they don't know the capabilities of and have never seen. So it's a hard scramble to get more power into these ships. And I love the idea that just becomes then the standard way of designing Starfleet ships for decades, for generations after that. It becomes an orthodoxy that you have a secondary hull with a gigantic warp core in it. You have enormous warp drive engines to push the ship where it needs to go at the fastest possible speed. And you have all that power for weapons, and it's a very nice visual representation, I think, of Starfleet's constant ideological struggle between, is it a humanitarian and exploration service, or is it a military? Is it a navy? And the answer is that it's both, and it's either or depending on what's required, depending on the situation, depending on the mood of the time. But I see Starfleet as having idealistic elements and kind of right-wing elements within it, you know? And Deep Space Nine, and actually Next Gen, to be fair to it, depicts this very well. There's always kind of a struggle between these mad admirals who want to constantly be on a war footing, who want to throw treaties in the bin so they can develop cloaking devices behind the back of the Romulans and stuff like that. And then you've got idealistic captains like Picard and Janeway who really, really believe the Federation hype and do hold those values dearly and really want the Federation kind of liberalism to succeed. And those things are in constant conflict. And I think it's one of the elements of certainly Berman era Trek that is, well, more relevant than ever. That struggle between kind of like decency and necessity or inevitability. The struggle between right and wrong. The struggle between kindness and cruelty. I think the design of these ships says a lot about kind of the narrative of Star Trek, and the addition of a secondary hull to go and fight a war. It says a lot, doesn't it? I thought I'd try and just set them up quite nicely, but it all looks higgledy-piggledy as fuck. But every one of these is an Enterprise. 3 of them are meant to be the exact same Enterprise. And I love them all. I love them all for loads of different reasons. But I feel really lucky to get a hold of that one ever since Eaglemoss went under, because I think I don't think they made that many of them. Especially for ships that never even made it to screen. Like, you know, that must be quite a niche thing, I guess. So yeah. What a ship. She beautiful. All fixed now, by the way.